Derek Poole, man, how's it going?
Good. Have yourself, man.
Doing well, doing well. I think that we've got everything live and now going out. Everybody should be able to hear us. Welcome to the November 2nd Training Talk Show with Barret Kendrick as myself from Bearco Training, and of course, Derek Poole with Echo 5 Training. We are looking forward to tonight's show, man, but how's Florida going for you?
Pretty good, man. It's we're getting a little cooler. Stop being like such baking hot. So that's been nice. Other than that, getting ready for the influx of uh the winter escapees from up north and stuff to invade.
Yeah, yeah, definitely so. Winter showed up, this week. I had my official first fire yesterday. That was the only thing that I like about cold weather. That it's good for putting meat in the freezer, but other than that, I'm kind of ready for it to be warm again. So, half of Louisiana split.
Yeah.
Half of them absolutely hated the 106-degree temperatures that we had this summer, and then there's me that like, hey, I'd much rather 106 degrees than need a fire in the fireplace.
I'm right there with you. I'd like everybody's that's not from here, especially. They're like, I don't know how you do it. I'm like, I don't know. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I'm just used to it. Anything else seems strange. Like I expect to walk outside and sweat, and I expect to change my clothes at least 2 times a day,
Right. I'll take
because
it.
I'm sweating. Yeah, it does make riding the motorcycle a little bit nicer. And you like your fires. I like to have an excuse to wear my Dixon flannel shirts. Love my Dixons. They're like nice and comfy. But
Yeah, definitely so, man. Definitely so. I'm just making sure that everything's going out live to the different channels. If y'all are tuning in tonight, be sure to let us know in the comments that A, you can hear us and we're not facing some technological issues, as well as where you're tuning in from. We've got it on a few different
and let us
channels.
know, does Derek and does Derek need to implement the World Series technique of talking like this because my lips don't match my words and it's very off-putting.
That's right. If his audio looks like it is coming in, a little bit too early or too late, certainly let me know. Maybe to make some adjustments. I know that just prior to the show going live, we had some issues with getting all of that synced up. But welcome to the show, man. We've got some good discussion, I think, tonight. Kind of deep diving a little bit, outside of the range, but also how it applies, directly to the gun range, talking about, very, time compressed, really fear-based incidents, a lot of the context of, ultimately, what we teach. And so we'll kind of pull back a few layers tonight and, deep dive into some of that kind of stuff. If you've got questions or thoughts throughout the show, be sure to kind of drop them in. And other than that, we'll kind of jump into, a few different things. I think starting off, Derek, it's probably important that we establish the context, right? I always kind of jump into classes and whatnot and try to establish the context of what the discussion is, that's taking place. And, being that if I'm out on a range teaching students and it's, for personal defense, then I need them to understand that it's not, in the context of going out to the gun range with our friends and family just to go enjoy recreational shooting. It's not, hunting deer and shooting animals at, 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 yards away. It's not the competition on Saturday morning. It's not just gun safety kind of stuff, but it's a very different context. And I think it's important that anytime we're trying to establish a discussion and break apart, a few of these points that, the viewers as well as kind of understand that context of the show. And so, I figured that it's probably, a good idea to really talk about the chart of doom here and kind of paint a picture. You want to do that?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
I
you
mean, if
want
you
me to
can
draw
draw pictures,
pictures?
that's even
I can get
fantastic. If
paper.
you got something to draw pictures on, all I have is a skull. I have a 3D printed Halloween
Oh,
skull,
oh, that's a cool skull.
right? It actually
That's
came
actually
out
pretty
really
cool.
good. I was kind of happy
Like,
with it. So
yeah,
that's what I've got. But
wow. And
I
you actually
did.
did that on
It's
the
not my
3D printer?
design. I can't, I can't,
Wow.
I didn't build this. All I did was, load it and hit print kind of thing, but it actually really came out good.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Let's see if I can pull this off because I do have a notebook and I
All
do have a
right.
marker
Yeah.
sitting
Let's
right
see if we can
here.
pull that off.
Let's see.
So the chart of
Um,
doom is something we use to kind of paint a picture with students. Some of the viewers may have heard us talk about this before, but it's a really good way of seeing just what we're talking about. And Deryck does it so fancy. I figured that, especially since he's got the marker there, that's awesome. I need a whiteboard behind you.
uh, um, we actually just did an instructor development class in uh Colorado. I was out there working with Guns for Everyone. Edgar had me out there, and we did a class. Had some really good candidates out there. Like, you know how that you always say to the person, like, "What are you, a
Mm-hmm.
nuclear scientist or something?" I
Yeah,
had a
it
guy that used to be
happens.
a
That's
nuclear
like
scientist.
I've loved that about teaching instructor development with a lot of different students. I've had so many different backgrounds with instructor candidates that have come through the class of, yeah, you get the nuclear scientist, or you get the retired special forces or active, right? You get all of these people with the neurologist, whatever. You get so many people with so many different backgrounds that drive some really awesome discussions in the class.
Yeah. So, here I'm just gonna throw some dots on this thing, and we'll go through it. Um, so Chart of Doom. Let's see. How's that coming through? Is it backwards?
No,
All right.
what? No,
The
no.
other way.
It's actually looking good.
Okay, because to me, looking at myself on the screen, everything looks backwards. Like words are backwards, everything's backwards. So I'm just like, huh? All right. So the way this thing is set up, the way the chart is set up is as we move this away from the
Raise it up
screen,
just a
out
little
further.
bit so they can actually see the control line. Yep.
All right. So as we start moving out control, we have less control over the situation. As we start moving up this axis, there's a significant increase in danger. Let me move my hands up there. As we move up, right? So we like to chart it out with, like, say you live in a place where you're allowed to shoot in your backyard, right? You have plenty of acres, you have a berm back there, and you walk outside and shoot whenever you want, right? So we'll just make that our first dot, right? So really low danger because you're there by yourself. You're fully in control of everything, right? So you have maximum control, pretty much max control, very little danger, right? Then you decide, your friends call you and they live about an hour away. So you decide to meet in the middle of the range. So you each drive about half an hour. So you go to a public range. So that's our little second dot, a public range. Um, at the public range, they have their own set of rules, right? You have other people around you, stuff like that. So you're giving up control because you're at a public range, because you have to work off of their rules. Maybe you can only fire so many rounds per second or whatever, things like that nature. And then you also have other people around you, so you can't control what people in other shooting bays and stuff are doing, right? So your danger goes up just maybe a little bit, right? Then we say the next one. I'll just say you've been doing it a lot. You really like shooting, so you decide that you're going to uh, jump into a competition, right? So we'll make that third dot competition, right? You're giving up even more control because the competition runners, they have their rules and stuff that you have to follow. But the danger doesn't go up markedly because they have so many range safety officers and other safety officers running around. So the danger pretty much stays the same. And then we can keep moving down and down and down until we hit this dotted line, right? Once we hit that dotted line, we could say the first one is like one person with a knife, right? Right? First person with a knife, right? Your control, much less control. The danger is markedly more, but you have a gun, so the danger is not like way up the line, right? But it's a single person with a knife, a contact weapon. And potentially you could outrun them as long as you stay outside of their ability to get within the distance it needs to cut you. You're 100% safe, right? So that starts moving up, right? Next one, you have, we'll say we got two attackers with some sort of contact weapon, right? Two attackers with contact weapons would be our next dot, and these are just sort of made up, situations, right? Even less control, and the danger is markedly increased because you have two versus one, right? You have this one person with a gun, and then right, then we like move out even further. We have like one person with a gun, even less control, more danger now because it's a non-contact weapon. It's an actual projectile shooting weapon. And then we get all the way up here to this top one, this ambush. This is the worst case scenario where the last thing on your mind was you were going to potentially need to defend yourself from a lethal situation, right? You were sitting there looking at your phone, texting your wife or your husband about what you need to get from the store, something along that nature. And then all of a sudden you have to go from, am I going to bring home a carton of eggs and a thing of milk, or now all of a sudden I have to switch my attention to, do I need to use my gun? What do I need to do to save myself? Once we get past this dotted line, this dashed line, we classify that in our classes as a dynamic critical incident. Something that's surprising, chaotic, and it's a lethal threat that where the use of force is authorized, or makes sense in this case, all the way up to this ambush. So when we do our classes, Barrett and I talk about this right out of the gate, so the students have an understanding of when we are presenting uh, techniques for them to practice and learn. We're teaching them stuff that works at that ambush point. And you want me to go backwards on the two, Barrett?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we're teaching you something that works here, it's going to work anywhere backwards down the line. The same cannot be said if we learn something here in competition. It's not necessarily going to work or be congruent with what happens to our body in that worst case scenario, right? So down here, we can look at our reloads. We can do some weird flip with the gun, all those type of things, and there's no real negative outcome to doing something like that. However, if up here you've only trained to do that technique of looking at your gun and stuff like that, you could potentially make a mistake because of what we know about what happens with the body under that kind of stress, the distortion of perception of time. Things speed up, things slow down, and all of a sudden now you're looking at the gun, and all of a sudden you speed up when you don't need to speed up. You're moving at the normal pace, but because your brain is processing things differently now, all of a sudden you do make a mistake. Or you've trained in a way that really messes, you reload way out here, and now all of a sudden you can't get your reload completed here because you're used to looking at it, and now you're totally fixated on that thing that's trying to kill you. So that's why we want to make sure that when we are training skills that work in the most plausible situations possible.
Boom. Good job, man. So, yeah, it's, ultimately so much firearm training that is out there sits in that high control, low danger situation, where, people have this kind of, misconception that, hey, I'm going to see the danger coming. I've got my head on a swivel. I'm going to see it coming. And because I'm going to see it coming, I'm going to have way more time to prepare for it and plan for it and initiate that response. But the reality is that, when you look at the significant amount of empirical evidence that we have out there with all of the, video conflicts that have taken place, you don't see a lot of prep time out of individuals. Violence happens very, very, very quickly, right? I think that when you think about home defense, there's some exceptions to that, right? When the alarm goes off, the dog's going crazy, you saw the shadow over there kind of thing. Generally speaking, there may be more time to be able to get to a safe position, get to a firearm, load the firearm in some situations, right? But when you look at public environment violence, it generally takes place all the way up there at that ambush type of situation. And so many people go to the range and we get in this mode of control of, I get to ignore life. There's a static target standing out there in front of me. I get to ignore all other variables. It's known distances. It's known shots fired. It's known targets. It's all of this stuff. And I get to think about and psych myself up of, all right, here I go, here I go, here I go. Let me get this gun out and, and deliver the rounds, the set number of rounds that I've already decided, based on the drill of the day kind of stuff, right? Well, in that ambush type of moment, there's an utter amount of chaos that is happening, right? Unpredictable chaos is that, you're constantly have so much information, that you're dealing with, that you're processing, including, potentially taking the life of another human being, and the variables that are dictating that, right? Potentially what's happening around that situation, your loved ones, right? Your brain is here, 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 here. It's wherever the focus is, right? Wherever your focus is, wherever your attention is, ultimately, that's where the brain is, and where it's not is everywhere else, and so many, and we get caught up and have this, well, I'll be able to kind of think about this, I'll be able to put my focus on the front sight, I'll be able to do this, I'll be able to do that. But under these type of ambush types of situation, in the context that we're talking about, that worst case situation is that, the threat's taking all of your attention. The threat's taking all of that focus, and you're having to process a high level amount of information. And so, anytime we want to, anytime we're talking about that, we want to practice, talk of discussion, or train for that personal defense type encounter, it really should be planning for that worst case situation, and training in proper context, right? Not traditional silo training, not, block training, but training in context with information processing, with variables and chaos that's taking place. I've heard her talk about that, before. And so as we start the discussion tonight, understand that we're not discussing, so many of these other types of situations. We're talking about what's most likely, that worst case ambush. You didn't see it coming, because if you had that much time to prepare for it, then you probably also had time to egress and get away from that situation, or maybe do something else without having to use the firearm.
I mean, just look at the things that have happened in the last few weeks. I mean, Maine, the active killer in Maine. I did an instructor development class in Maine. It was about a year ago, and it was a huge class. I was just outside of Portland, and like Maine is, it's up in New England and stuff like that. But it's a very gun-friendly state, and it's very easy to get a concealed carry permit and carry a gun. And like I, maybe nobody was carrying in any of those spaces where that shooter showed up. But if somebody was like carrying a gun, if they didn't train in context, there could have been somebody there with a gun that never even responded to it because their training didn't match that worst case scenario potentially. It is what we're getting at. You know, but there's also the deniability of is that there's no way this is happening right now. There's no way, because if you thought somebody was going to come shoot up the restaurant, or I think it was a bowling alley in Maine was
Yeah.
one of his stops, like if you thought or had any inkling of an idea that somebody was going to come shooting on bowling night, you wouldn't go to bowling night, right? So that whole like, there's no way this is what's happening right now.
Yeah, just that
Somebody's throwing
rationalization,
firecrackers.
right? And
Right.
this goes back to the past experiences, biases, expectations, training, all of that goes into it. But it's just it's not normal to be in a facility where you have a gunman coming into it. So if we're talking about that active shooter situation, yeah, sometimes there's that. I mean, every time, there's that decision making, processing component, and sometimes you can work through it faster than others. But, I always kind of fall back to the Pulse nightclub shooting, and not Pulse nightclub, excuse me, the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting, where the gunman is watching the movie, goes out the exit door, comes back in dressed to head to toe in black armor, with a shotgun, a rifle, and a handgun, throwing smoke canisters into the room, right? And some of the survivors of that situation, when the guy came in, they weren't like, "Hey, there's a gunman over there." They're thinking immediately that there's no way that's a gunman. It must be special effects, because it's the first showing, it's the midnight showing, the premiere showing of the Batman Return movie, right? And it's just we try to rationalize what we're seeing. It happened the Fort Lauderdale airport, right? Gunfire inside the airport, yet survivors were thinking it was cars, or a car backfiring driving outside. Right? And so, whether it's the active shooter situation, or it's just walking down the street and all of a sudden you turn around and there's somebody behind you with something you think is like a gun, right? It's normal to be like, well, is that a cell phone? Is that a flashlight? Is it, some other object in the hand? What else could it be? Because it's not normal to walk down the street and have somebody walk up behind you with a gun, no matter what city, USA. But
Right.
obviously, if you're walking in downtown Chicago, or then you may come to that decision a whole lot faster than Maine, because Maine, sees, I forgot what the numbers were, but it's, double digit numbers, murders, in the state, year round. And it wasn't that many. I think it's like 20 murders per year or something like that statewide. And here you had, about that shot in one night in one facility. Yeah. So that,
In one small
right,
town.
one small town. And
Right.
yeah, so it's that ambush, it's important to talk about in the context of the ambush, and it's important to train in the context of the ambush, because if your skills work there, they work when you have more control and you're facing left danger. But it's not the same the other way around. And we see that time and time again. There's plenty of people that have been in situations where they passed the qualification, they shot the qual, they did the drills good, and yet they failed to apply the skills in real life. Because it's not one to one.
Oh yeah, I just got somebody said the bowling alley was a gun-free zone according to the signage. I did not know that.
I think that is the case. It's at least what I heard. I've seen at least a couple of pictures going around with the signs off to the side saying, basically, we ask you to please leave the vehicles. I mean, excuse me, not the vehicles. Please leave the guns, outside. All right. Let's see. Jump around, check comments and stuff. But as we're doing that. Um, so, dealing with the ambush, or, another way of talking about that is the time compressed type of incident. Deryck already talked about threatening, dealing with a threat. That threat at times may, dictate the best options running away. At times, it may be mouth words and communication. At times, it may be hands on, or less lethal or non-lethal, or a firearm lethal force response, right? Or a vehicle response. There's just all kinds of responses that fall, down into it, that are dictated, by the situation. But when we're talking about a firearms class, we're talking about, a forced firearms response. And so, we're talking about tonight a time compressed incident, and potentially involving a lethal force response like a firearm. And so, what do I mean by time compressed? It's the situation is happening very, very, very quickly. And in the context of self defense, usually is also over very, very, very quickly. And so when you hear the word time compress, think about like driving down the road, and maybe you're on the phone, maybe you're not, maybe your eyes are on the road, but out of nowhere, here's that deer that jumped out in front of you, right? That's a time compressed situation. That there's a very sharp beginning and there's a very sharp ending. And maybe it's a second long, maybe it's a 2 second long event, but there's a tremendous amount that's happening inside of that time compressed situations. Well, anytime that the situation is that compressed, then ultimately there goes your ability to sit back and contemplate what is the best option here. you know and so in the context of the deer jumping out, it's like, well, what's better? Do I swerve or do I hit the brakes? You don't have time to think about that, if it is truly that time compressed, right? If it is that last second situation, or the child that ran out in front of your car. You don't have the time to sit there and think about what's better, braking or swerving. So what ends up happening? And that's kind of, a lot of what we'll be talking about tonight.
Yeah. And just so we'll get this out of the way here early, that you and I are not talking about Hicks law. Like, we're not like giving validity to Hicks law, or we're not saying Hicks law is right or wrong. It's like we're talking about, you know, sort of around the same topic of what Hicks law covers, but like in the personal defense space, some instructors will cite Hicks law of why you should only be doing this, and others will say, no, you shouldn't only be doing that. You should learn this, that, and that because Hicks law has been proven wrong. So we're
Yep.
not talking
So
about Hicks
not
law.
talking about that tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, it was. You're dead on with the vehicle stuff. You know, the motorcycle accident. I can tell you, I saw the woman's head wasn't even looking my direction when she pulled out in front of me. Like that, like through that tinted Florida window, I could see a head turn the opposite direction, and she was just blindly pulling out because my eyes went like whoop. Like, how do I get away from that thing in that car? And I been training a long time. I was a motorcycle safety instructor, taught new riders and everything else, and I knew what to do. But I had to delay my response because of other situations around me. With another rider, I had to figure out where he was before I decided to just automatically swerve the bike.
All right, so when dealing with that kind of situation, like in Deryck's incident, when old lady ran him over, the child running out in front of the car, the deer jumping out, the uh, whatever, and insert whatever, the lethal force encounter. There you are enjoying bowling now with your family, and all of a sudden, there's the bad guy that comes in with a rifle, right? And when we're talking about these types of situations, it's very, very different how the brain responds versus being at the gun, at the gun range in a high control situation, a square range environment, without, those variables present. Right. It's, we're constantly taking in information, through our senses, whether it's, eyes or ears or touch, all of that, right? Information's constantly coming in. And, when that pattern that matches fear, is filtered through the amygdala, well, it starts to initiate, more of automatic reactions, right? And so we've talked about that in the classes before that come into it, is that, that's where, you start to, you hear people discuss, fight or flight, or freeze, type responses, right? It's happening, at that subconscious level. And so when you end up in these time compressed situations where that information is starting to initiate those stimulus response patterns, they start to, one, or improvised, or completely, automatic, or potentially just improvised because your brain didn't have a pattern to match what was taking place, or you've had training in that situation. Maybe you've trained a bunch in that situation, and you had a prior experience that was programmed in your brain that gave you that response pattern to, potentially automate that response. And that's really, ultimately where we want to be, is we want to be that trained individual. If you haven't seen, Rob's take on, his O3 kind of evolved his thinking about the OODO loop, that people talk about the OODA loop, right? If you have not seen that, I think you can probably find a video of it on YouTube, but he kind of breaks that down a little bit further and really, talks about, that the processes of what we go through, in that type of situation versus an untrained person, or trained individual, right? We obviously want to be that trained individual. We can respond, a whole lot more efficiently when we are that trained individual, and when we do have, those stimulus response patterns that sit there. But regardless, that observation takes place, right? Information comes in, and with that information comes in, when we're talking about some sort of ambush and caught off guard, well, we've got also some sort of reaction that happens, right? And there's lots of different reactions that can take place, and some of the ones that we'll see time and time again, when someone has been startled by something that, that their attention's not already on, well, you'll start to see things like they'll orient towards what that threat is, right? If it's coming over the right shoulder, all of a sudden you start to see the head follow the eyes, over that right shoulder, where the upper body begins to turn towards that as well, right? The body will close at the hips, and can lower its center of gravity to be able to stage itself to run away from that danger, to protect itself from that danger, right? Something as simple as walking down the trail in the woods and seeing the stick that, that all of a sudden the amygdala response just thinks it is a snake or something, right? That very short path, rudimentary, it took in the information, thought it was a snake, and all of a sudden somebody's lowering their center of gravity to be able to jump away from that snake. or hands initiating more of a protective movement, towards the head, towards the core, right? Or just blinking, right? All kinds of different things that ultimately can take place, with those types of situations. And so we have that reaction. Well, in an untrained individual, if they don't have a plan, if they don't have a trained plan that has already been developed and practiced, well, then, ultimately they're stuck simply, improvising, that situation, improvising that response. And, and with that improvised response, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But it certainly would be hopeful, to try to depend on that improvised response. And so, we want to have that planned action, and so we want to have a pattern recognition, right? We want to see something. We want to have that trained experience, that trained pattern uh, in the catalog, in the brain, to be able to come up with that. Oh, look, you see, Derek's got the whiteboard going at it, and so
Yeah.
we want to be able to recognize what is taking place, and ultimately have a stimulus response to that, as a response pattern to that. And so, we talk about this as simple as, maybe running out of ammunition in an emergency situation of the gun. You don't want to have to sit there and contemplate and figure out, why is the gun not working. You want to be able to recognize the fact that the slide went to slide lock, and more likely than not, because you've been training that way and you've been doing the same thing every single time your brain recognized that some was a slide lock, that you responded by reloading that firearm. And so you created a stimulus response pattern in your brain, where you do have that trained plan for that stimulus of going to slide lock. And so it already initiated that response. And so that's what we're after, is that trained response in that situation. And we want to do that for as much as we can do, with the gun handling or anything else, whether it's combatives or working with knives, or, or whatever that type of situation, we want, or driving down the road, right? You've gone through a defensive driving course, and you've figured out, through training and practice and development of that skill, what is that better response in that situation, whether swerving or, hitting the brakes.
Right. Nowadays, with the technology in these vehicles, half the time slamming on the brakes is the better option.
Right.
With all the braking technology,
And at one point, we'd probably
you
have
know,
to ask the question,
um,
is, what kind of braking system, right? But I think we're probably past that with
right?
the largest majority of vehicles that are out on the road.
Yep. Yeah. So like with new technology, sometimes you have to reassess your training, or maybe change up how you're trained, to meet the realities, or to maximize the benefits of new technology, whatever that may be. Um, when we set up this, when you sent me the topic that we were going to talk about, I was I was out riding my motorcycle that day, and like when I ride a motorcycle, I carry a gun, and if anybody's probably, if you're watching PDN, you've probably seen a video that I've done on carrying while riding, or you've seen read an article that I did on it, or at least seen one. I carry the gun the same way on the motorcycle as I do when I'm walking around, as I do when I'm in a car. Now, it's not always possible for everybody, depending on body type, like how you dress, things of that nature. But I was riding the motorcycle, and I was like, this sort of makes sense. Like for this class, for this topic, is when I'm riding a motorcycle, I always wear gloves. Always wear gloves when I'm on my motorcycle, because God forbid I go down, hands are what's going to hit the asphalt. So I'm always wearing gloves. Well, I train from time to time that with gloves on, and I strip the glove off before I go to grab the gun. So it, I don't train with gloves. Like, a lot of people go to classes and they'll wear, like some sort of tactical glove, or they'll wear the mechanic gloves or something like that. Well, those type of, yeah, like those, depending on your gun, but a lot of guns you can still
Right.
wear those gloves, get a good firing grip on the gun, pull the gun up, get your finger in that trigger guard area, and touch the trigger and press the trigger with those types of gloves. Whereas my motorcycle
You
gloves,
cannot. Right.
yeah, it's
Or,
really
or at
iffy.
least,
And
if you got like the big Minnesota, like it's cold outside, the big thick things, because I don't want to be cold, right?
exactly right. So like on a motorcycle, I change gloves styled based off of the weather environment that I'm in. Is it raining? Is it super cold? Or is it just Florida summer hot? Right. But so I don't have to like figure out some sort of tactile feedback so that I'm doing the right thing based off of what's happening. I just gotten into the habit of I just strip the glove off, because I had the tactile feedback of I've got gloves on my hand, get the gloves off to get this gun out. So I don't get into that habit of, you know, I'm wearing the mechanics like you just showed, and they always fit with my gun. I can use a gun with mechanics gloves, but then all of a sudden I'm wearing like a little bit heavier glove that I can't do that. I pull the gun out, and now I have this gun in my hand that I can't get my finger on the trigger. And now what am I going to do? I'm going to go to that ORI that you were talking about. I'm going to go back. Now I have to improvise something. I'm in that improvisation of what the hell do I do now? Do I reholster? Do I put it in this hand? Do I strip this off with my teeth? Like, what do I do? So, it's the less options we have, the easier it is for us to train. So I get the tactile feedback of I have gloves on. I know what I do when I have gloves on. I strip the glove off and I go to my gun. So after I've reacted, recognized, and I start my response is pull the glove off and go for the gun. Whereas if I don't have gloves on, I don't have tactile feedback of I need to get something off my hands to get hold of my gun. So like I have students ask like, why don't you ever wear gloves when you train? Because your hands get real beat up training with gloves on, with barehanded. If you do a couple days, I'm just like, because if I do that, I'm building a bad pattern of, well, sometimes I leave the glove on, sometimes I take the
And
glove
that
off.
kind of brings up, part of what tonight's about, right? Is if it's sometimes you do this and sometimes you do that, what happens during that time compressed situation? So what happens if it's that time compressed situation and you've got a different answer, depending on different, situations? What's likely to happen in a time compressed event? And your brain's not going to sit there and be like, all right, well, what's first here? It just goes to what has been most likely, most practiced, right? Most developed
Yep.
on that. And so, if Deryck every single time he puts gloves on, trains with stripping that glove off or bringing the motorcycle out there and, working at the gun range of stripping that glove off and stripping that glove off and stripping that glove off, then that's likely going to happen with his response, right? But if you go out to the range and 50% of the time you just leave the gloves on because it's cold outside, you don't get in, you don't ever practice, stripping them off, then your brain is likely just to go straight to the gun when, and skip over the try to stripping them off. And now all of a sudden you can't get the finger on the trigger guard because it won't fit, with those gloves, or it doesn't feel right, or it doesn't work well, right? It impedes your ability to be accurate with the firearm, whatever. All of a sudden the brain just kind of skipped over that option because here was the well-trained option and that's what it went at. And so, yeah, we want to, as much as we can, reduce some of those extra variables, because when, things are very time compressed, the decision uh, processing, at that point goes out unless that incident happens to go on longer. Then all of a sudden, maybe there's a second decision.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So the key there is right training in context and being consistent, like applying consistency as much as possible. That makes sense. Like if you can't carry a gun, you say you carry appendix carry when you're walking around town, when you're riding in the car, but all of a sudden you get on a motorcycle, and I'm just using motorcycles because that's my reference of you know when you could possibly need to change, and you're like more of a sport bike rider where you're laid down over top of the tank. Well, Yeah, I wouldn't be carrying appendix carry because last thing I want to do is scratch my pain up because I'm leaned down over top of the tank. And it probably would be pretty uncomfortable laying down on that tank and having that gun pressed in you. So now all of a sudden I have to move that, say, to strong side or do some other thing. But the other thing should be consistent and be consistent when you're wearing certain garments. So, like your body's getting proprioception, you're giving a tactile feedback to your body of, okay, I have this kind of jacket on, or I have a vest on now. That means I need to go to the gun on the strong side as opposed to go on the appendix and be very, very diligent about going to the range and training with your vest or your jacket or whatever it is you wear and going through that type of recognition, presentation, processing information and executing drills that way, so that it's not when the situation arises, all of a sudden you're like going and the gun's not there, and like Barrett said, this time compressed situation, your window to actually get the gun out might be very small, and going to the wrong spot is just enough time where all of a sudden now getting the gun out is not even a viable option, right? Because we need time and space to actually get the gun out into the fight.
No, definitely, and that's consistency with the guns on body, and even someone that works as a armed professional carrying strong side hip and then carrying appendix carry off duty. Obviously, there's a small amount of concern there. That person should spend some time, in plain clothes practicing with that firearm coming from concealment. Because if the only practice and reps that they ever get is at the range with the gun offset strong side hip, with a level 3 holster, then their hand truly may reach in the wrong direction, right? And it could slow that response down, right? So we want consistency. You want consistency with as much as we can have it, right? With the types of firearms that we carry, the location we carry in, the type of holster that we carry in, as much as we can have consistency, that is going to help us, one, get the gun out efficiently, but it's also going to help us, be better prepared, in those stimulus response patterns and the myelization process of getting better and better and faster, with those physical skills. Uh, but other consistency points, right? You go out to the range, and one of the things that comes up a lot, is even things like having different methods for for loading the gun, or coming off a malfunction or something like that, right? So you'll see a lot of people that will use the slide lock, to release the slide, and that works sometimes, most of the time. Insert whatever you want, it doesn't matter, but what we can't insert that is it works all the time, right? And so what do we mean by that, right? Well, we are talking about a fear-based response that could include things like an adrenaline dump very quickly into the body, that it could include things of I'm not going to say loss of fine motor skills, but making fine motor skills harder and harder, right? And so we don't completely lose them in the sense that shooting's still a fine motor skill for that matter. Holding the gun, can still be that, right? But it's, but what we do is that finer motor skills are harder to perform. And so, if you are forced to reload your gun, and you have the big gloves on that Deryck was talking about, or you have lost, some of your finer motor senses and skills to be able to push that release down, or you have a super tight, slide lock lever, or you've always trained on a full size gun and now you're carrying a tiny gun that, has one that's almost impossible to press down, or your hands happen to have blood on them, or wet or sweat, it doesn't matter, insert, it doesn't always work to send that slide forward. And how do I know that? Because we see it all the time on the gun range with students, but it's not even about that. You could ignore that piece for a second, but as soon as you start to bring in something like a malfunction, right? Deryck, if I sit there having to pull my magazine out, rack the slide a few times, and stick my new magazine in, how well is that slide lock going to work to chamber that next round?
It's not.
It's not,
It's
right? So,
right.
so now all of a sudden it's okay. Well, I do this, until my thumb slips across it a few times, or I do this until, I have to, reload after a malfunction, right? And so, why not be consistent and do the same thing every time that we know is going to work, for all of these types of situations with simply overhand racking? Because here's the thing, right? Is if you always practice using that slide lock lever, and that's where all of your reps are, all of your reps are, all of your reps are. And then all of a sudden you end up in like the 0.003% category of being stuck with a malfunction, in that the life or death situation. Where's your brain immediately going to go to? And it's going to go to trying to release the slide lock lever, because that's where all the reps have taken place. And so, that's when we end up in these types of situations, we don't sit there and go through all these different categories. We end up typically going to what's been most practiced, what's been most trained, and you end up with, a single option, not multiple options. It's just that, especially when you're, have trained stimulus response pattern in that type of situation.
Yeah. And it somebody could like say, hey, I just got out of an instructor development course, so these topics like almost always come up, with the instructor candidates. Well, isn't the slide lock lever faster?
Yeah.
100%. If a gun is functioning properly, the slide lock lever is going to work. But think of this like Barrett was talking about, this time compressed situation. Your your adrenaline, like you have this massive adrenaline dump, and you like go and you grab the gun out of the holster, you get a good presentation, you drive it out, you start shooting, and say you're carrying something with only 5 rounds, 6 rounds, and you run through those rounds, and you recognize the what you think is slide lock, and you start bringing the gun back in, and you drop the magazine, you insert the new magazine, you hit the slide lock lever, and you throw it back out there, and click. Now all of a sudden you have to. So you've trained non-diagnostic linear malfunction, but you're now putting yourself further behind the curve, because now you got to come in, tap, and rack, and now the gun's going to get back in the fight. And you've never done it before, but that one time is that adrenaline dump. You didn't get the perfect grip like you normally do, and by your imperfect grip, you've like layered your thumb sitting on that slide lock button. So why not just train the way that's going to keep you getting closer to in front of the curve instead of keeping you behind that curve when you've been caught off guard.
All right, and this goes back to kind of what we were talking about the chart of doom earlier, right? You train for that worst case situation, because if your skills work there, then they're also going to work when you have more control over that situation, and you do have time, to be able to think about it, because you did happen to, to get information on the bad guy, and you did happen to be better prepared than, truly ambushed by somebody standing behind you or something, right? It works backwards, as kind of Deryck referred to it. It works all the way up, works all the way down. And so,
Yeah.
we want to set ourselves up for success. Not to make us feel the best on the range, and not what is fastest in isolation, but what is most reliable in the context of use, in the context of applying that skill in real world situations.
Yeah. I got a comment from Lorraine, Dingman's Ferry, PA. Ladies need to do practice draws from concealment due to the fact that we carry depending on our clothing. It's the same, exactly right. Same context as what I was talking about. Me riding somebody riding a motorcycle part of the time and not riding a motorcycle. The minute you do something different, like maybe like my wife, she's a she teaches personal training, lifting weights and stuff. When she's like wearing, like spandex and workout clothes and stuff like that, there's not an on body option. So she has to practice with her carry method, which is it's on body but also off body. It's a sort of a fanny pack like thing, right? So she knows if she's wearing like workout clothes, that is the draw stroke, the presentation that she needs to go through, right? So like I in my classes, even ladies will carry on body in class, and then if they're like, well, I carry in a purse to and from the gym. I'm like, all right, well, do you have a holster? Is it in your bag? Yes, yes, yes. Cool, bring it out. Let's get some reps then. You know.
Yeah, and like you said, the key with it there is, And it's I forgot who you said that was the commenter there, but that she brought up that women need to train in the different types of draw responses or presentation response that they have based on the different clothing, right? You pointed it out, Derek, is that when your bride is carrying with those types of clothes, she knows that here's where the gun from comes from and here's how to get it out because she can put in the reps and and she has that stored in such a way that her hand doesn't go to the wrong location trying to present the firearm. And anytime you do have inconsistencies, it's best to have those inconsistencies tied to something like that, like Derek tying his to the motorcycle with the gloves, Rachel tying hers to that holster with those types of clothes when she's in her workout clothes teaching others, right? Is that hopefully there is that common variable that can be tied to that skill to match it up appropriately with that stimulus response pattern.
Yeah.
What other?
And not
Go
only
ahead.
that, here's the other thing for everybody, right? Well, a lot of instructors out there are like, well, try it both ways and learn both ways because you might never know when you need. Well, here's the thing: any skill, anything
Can I
we
say it?
learn,
It's just
yeah,
another
go
tool
for
for
it.
your toolbox, man. Just file it away if you
Right,
ever need it.
right. If you're an instructor, you need tools in your toolbox. If you're a student and all you're interested in is being a student and being very good and proficient at using a firearm or whatever the personal defense skill is, you don't need a bunch of tools that do the same thing. You need tools for different situations. And when you pick that one thing that works, like from my earlier chart, works all the way backwards and it's efficient and you could be consistent, think about the time, effort, energy required to learn and practice new skills. If you only have one way to do that and it works all those different places and it's efficient and it's consistent, then that is more training time for other areas that you can train. Because if you learn all these different things, you have to train them. Just knowing it isn't enough. Then you end up into that, that ORI, that improvisation line because you haven't practiced it enough to make it, you know, an automated response or as close to automated as possible,
Yep.
not automatic.
And I think another area that, is really directly tied into this is shots fired, right? You see so many times where people get stuck in a certain pattern on the range. Well, maybe it's the Saturday morning competition, fired 2 rounds into the target and move on, or, whatever number they choose, right? The Mozambique drill, but it's not that. No, it's just blank my mind as I'm
That
saying that.
that Elo
Yeah.
Relevante.
Well, yeah. I mean, if the El Presidente drill or whatever, right? Where there's a dictated number of shots fired, and again, is if this is all the reps that they're getting, 2 shots, 2 shots, 2 shots, 2 shots, and that's exactly where the brain is going to go, in a real life situation, is they're going to apply that skill in that way that it has been practiced over and over and over. And then, they're going to end up being that pause there in existence, right? So if all they're ever practicing is the 2 rounds, then highly likely, that is what we're going to see in real life. And so even something like that would be important to try to step away, from those, arbitrary patterns and really try to tie it to information processing as much as possible. And that's hard to do. It's hard to have the training discipline, to keep that kind of stuff up, to go into the range and visualizing different threats and not looking at it as a piece of paper, but visualizing the type of threat, visualizing the circumstances, visualize what happened, what that they believe that person's doing, the type of weapon they have, visualizing all of that and, delivering, as much as possible, not set number of rounds into the target, and somewhere in there visualizing that a target, stopping. They put up their hands, they turned around, they ran away, they dropped the weapon, maybe they went down, right? Visualizing different things. And it takes a lot of training discipline to keep up with that kind of stuff when you don't have the technology available, like the I forget what's his name's target system. Um,
Oh, the
yeah,
Jedburgh.
Jedburgh, Scott's target system.
Yeah.
With
Yep.
Scott Jedberg's got a pretty unique target system that doesn't allow you to get stuck in the patterns because it randomizes and dictates the number of shots required, not shots, but the number of hits on the target, per rep that you're pulling up, right? But so we want to get, out of those types of patterns. We did, let's see, we got a question about sub-second draws and timers. And I guess our thoughts on that. I think it's relevant to talk about, right? Being able to get a gun out of the holster in under a second is awesome, except, it has nothing to do with getting the gun out of the holster in under a second with a shot timer that's telling you to go, right? It kind of goes to how we started the, discussion with the chart of doom earlier, is that, when you're at the range and you've got the shot timer and you've got your hand ready to go to that holster and you're staring out there at the target and you're waiting to wire up the gun, on the command of the beep going off, that is in isolation, that it is ignoring all the other information processing and all the other variables. That's ignoring it for, that speed of the presentation. And so, is it important to be able to get the gun out of the holster quickly? Well, it depends on the situation, but there's certainly situations that require somebody to get it out really, really quickly. But the sub-second presentation, it's would be much better measured in the context of a real, if we want to do it in training, right? The context of a real high level scenario that involved multiple options for, the student, or, for the subject, right? They could have gone to the gun. They maybe the knife was a better option. Maybe they should have been communicating. Maybe they had pepper spray. Maybe they had, a taser. Maybe they had all of this different stuff where the student actually had the options. And then, what does that presentation look like from that clock? Was it still sub-second? No. We know that, because of the human performance factors that, surround the situation, right? There has to be decision-making component. There has to be time to be able to send the signal through the motor cortex. There has to be time to be able to carry out the movement. And so, when you get rid of the isolated skill and you put it into how we would typically apply it, then, all of a sudden the sub-second's not a sub-second.
Well, like if we go back to here, right? So, because the question of a timer will come up from time to time, and I will use the O3R like to talk about this. The timer doesn't give you any valuable information until you get to here. It does not measure how long. So, like on the range, if we use say a math drill, like where it's just not shoot the high center chest. It's all right. I'm going to call a number. You're going to subtract 3 from that number. If that number turns out after subtracting 3 is 0 or negative, then it's 3 to 5 rounds in the high center chest. If it's any other number, then you shoot 1 round at that number, right? So the observation is the student standing there waiting for my mouth to make noise. Then they have to react. If they're in our classes, we incorporate the body's natural reaction of the startle. So they have to go through that startle reaction of what's going to happen natural. Something's going to happen in the real world. Then they have to recognize what number came out of my mouth, what is -3 from that number, and then do I shoot a number or do I shoot the high center chest? Now is when they're like reaching for the gun, pulling the gun out of the holster, orienting the gun, extending, and pressing the trigger. So if I push the timer when I say something, it's going to look a whole lot different if I wait push the button here and just expect them to respond. So the value from the timer number is minimal at best. It because it leaves out that observe, the react, and recognize portion of it. It's only counting time for that response. And the response can be very, very different, right? Depending on the situation of like what's it like outside. Is it very bright? Are you wearing a lot of clothes? Do you have to come from concealment? Like all these other things. So, like a gun match, a timed match of shooting competition, you know, it means a lot because they know what they have to shoot. They know, like, they don't have to observe, react, recognize. The only thing they're observing is beat, and the react and recognize are out the window because they already know beforehand. They're standing there waiting to make a free throw, which is 2 shots to the A box or whatever the criteria is for that competition.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
but they're fun. Don't get me
Right. Yeah.
wrong.
Right.
Like, don't Barrett and I both have been out there with Rob. We pull out timers and we like mess around with each other, and it's fun. Um, but in terms of pure really training for personal defense, the benefit of it is very, very minimal, in my opinion.
No, it does. I mean, it's like I said, it's you want to be quick, right? But you want to be quick in the proper context. And so you want to build the skill in the proper context, which means there has to be information processing. And so it's as soon as you add in the true information processing component that forces you to think, before and while, getting the gun out, while taking the shots, then, all of a sudden it's not as isolated. It's not as, what's the word I'm looking for? Boxed in, as it would be, with just the timer beep going off.
And I mean, on the range, we try to make it as complicated as possible for that whole recognizing and then like cognitive processing before the response. But I mean, uh, it's nothing compared to like real life or death situation. Like, there's no way we could make it, you know, that stressful as life or death situation. Like, I could even threaten that I'm going to shoot my student if they don't get the shots off fast enough, and they know I'm not going to do it. So there's nothing you can do to make the range as stressful as the real life or death stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But we need to, and granted, we change the chaos added on students, depending on the student, right? Some people we make way more complicated, than others, and we try to challenge whatever that student needs. But at the end of the day, like Deryck said, none of it is going to be real life. I can sit there and do 150 push-ups on the range and do jumping jacks and box jumps, wind sprints, whatever else. But at the end of the day, even that sort of physical stress doesn't mimic the adrenaline dump and the fear-based response that you get from the body.
Yeah.
It,
Man,
it
that hour
did,
flew
it
fast.
definitely did. You see any other comments, questions that we need to discuss? I know you're looking at different channels than I
Nope,
am.
not over here. No, I don't see any over here. I got the PDN live
All
queued
right.
up.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, to tonight's show. Obviously, thanks to Primary Arms Online for sponsoring the show this evening. They've been a fantastic sponsor. There's Deryck Poole with his Primary Arms hat. They make all kinds of great stuff, but the store sells all kinds of options when it comes to firearms accessories. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. I think you'll be pretty satisfied and excited about using their website, seeing their prices, their specials, all that kind of stuff. So be sure to check out Primary Arms online. Thanks for tuning in the show. If you're not a member of Personal Defense Network, consider joining. There's specials all the time. I believe our special is the Training Talk coupon code that will give you 10% off. But coming in towards the end of the year, they'll have some specials and whatnot. We've got a show that will dictate be put together for early December, first Thursday in December. To go along with the theme of the year as well. So we hope to see y'all back next month. And Deryck, man, good to see you.
You too, man.
Absolutely.